I'll never forget that morning, June 30th, 2009, when the sun barely pierced the gloom over Kingston Mills Locks, a desolate stretch of Ontario where I once thought only the wind and water held secrets. But that day, the black depths of the Rideau Canal whispered something far darker, something no one should ever hear. My name is Steve Koopman, an investigator with Kingston Police, and I was the first to arrive at the scene. As I stared into the still, reflective water, I had no idea I was about to uncover a nightmare that would haunt me forever. There it was, a Nissan Sentra, submerged beneath the surface, just a few meters down. An ordinary car, its peeling black paint barely visible through the murky water. But it didn't belong here. Through the haze, its shape loomed like a steel coffin abandoned to the depths. I called for the dive team immediately. When Glenn Newell surfaced, his face was ashen, his eyes hollow as if he'd seen the devil himself. 4 bodies inside, he stammered, voice trembling. They're not moving. I stood on the bank, a chill creeping up my spine. Not from the morning breeze, but from the deathly aura that hung over the place. The car was hauled up, water gushing from every crevice, carrying the rancid stench of decay. The driver's window gaped open, yet no one had escaped. Inside were 4 bodies, 3 young girls, Zainab, 19, Sahar, 17, Geeti, 13, and an older woman, Rona, about 50. They sat there, motionless, wet hair plastered to their faces, eyes wide open as if staring straight at me, pleading for answers I didn't yet have. Zainab slumped in the front seat, hands resting on the wheel, but there was no sign of a struggle. Sahar and Geeti were crammed in the back, pressed together as if seeking one last shred of warmth. Rona, the eldest, was wedged in the far corner, head bowed, her long hair floating like seaweed in the cramped space. None wore seatbelts. The seats were reclined at an odd angle, as if they'd been placed there, not seated willingly. I noticed the bruises on their heads, small but distinct, and wondered, were they dead before the water took them, or did it steal their final breaths? The question that chilled me most was, who did this? This wasn't an accident. Fragments of a Lexus SUV's headlight littered the shore, like breadcrumbs in a twisted fairy tale. Someone had pushed them down here, letting the black water swallow them whole, silencing any cries for help. Then Mohammad Shafia showed up at the station, eerily calm. He reported 4 family members missing, 3 daughters and a cousin. "I don't know what happened," he said through a translator, his tone flat, like he was reciting a business ledger. But his eyes betrayed him, cold, empty, devoid of grief. Beside him stood Tooba Yahya, his wife, and Hamed, their eldest son. They looked like a perfect family on the outside, but I sensed something rotting within. I turned back to the water. It flowed on, silent, as if it hadn't witnessed a crime. But I knew, down in those depths, 4 souls were waiting. Zainab, who dreamed of love and freedom. Sahar, who'd wept to teachers about beatings. Geeti, a 13-year-old desperate to escape. And Rona, trapped in a family that saw her as a burden. They didn't just die in the water. They'd been dying for years, in a house where honor trumped life itself. As night fell over Kingston Mills Locks, I stood alone by the canal. The water murmured, like their voices whispering their story. I vowed to myself, this isn't the end. I'll drag the truth up from this black abyss, no matter how gruesome it is. Back at the station, I couldn't shake the image of those 4 bodies in the Nissan, lifeless, trapped, their silent screams echoing in my mind. I needed to know who they were, not just as victims, but as people. The Shafia family file landed on my desk, and on paper, they looked like a success story. Mohammad Shafia, 58, a wealthy Afghan immigrant who'd made a fortune in Dubai real estate before settling in Montreal in 2007. His wife, Tooba Yahya, 41, mother of 7. Their eldest son, Hamed, 20, the obedient heir, and Rona Amir Mohammed, 50, listed as a cousin, though whispers of polygamy soon surfaced. They'd fled Afghanistan decades ago, hopping from Pakistan to Australia to the UAE, chasing a better life. But beneath that polished exterior, I found a house of horrors. The girls, Zainab, Sahar, and Geeti, weren't just daughters. They were prisoners. Teachers' reports painted a grim picture. Zainab, the eldest, had begged for freedom, her eyes hollow from years of control. She'd fallen for a Pakistani boy, a secret that sparked her father's rage. Sahar, the middle child, once sobbed to a counselor about bruises from her brother Hamed's fists, her dreams of love crushed under threats. Geeti, just 13, was the rebel, caught shoplifting, expelled for immodest clothes, pleading with social workers to take her away. "I can't breathe in that house," she'd said. I could almost hear her voice, desperate, fading into the dark. Then there was Rona, the first wife Mohammed had taken in 1979. Infertile, she'd been sidelined when Tooba arrived a decade later, bearing children Rona raised as her own. But her diary, found later, told a different tale. "Tooba called me a slave," she wrote. "They held my passport, my life. I was nothing." She'd begged for divorce, only to be mocked. Her siblings claimed she'd feared for her life in those final days. Her pleas drowned out by the family's twisted honor code. I pictured her trapped in that Montreal home, a ghost among the living, her cries unheard. Mohammed ruled them all with an iron fist masked as tradition. Wiretaps later revealed his venom. "They betrayed me. Whores, all of them." To him, love was a sin, freedom a disgrace. Tooba, his partner in cruelty, enforced his will, her silence as damning as his words. Hamed, the enforcer, watched his sisters like a hawk, his loyalty to his father absolute. This wasn't a family, it was a cult, built on fear and blood. I thought of those girls, their spirits crushed long before the water took them. Zainab's secret boyfriend, Sahar's hidden photos, Geeti's defiance. All snuffed out by a father who saw them as stains on his pride. And Rona, discarded like trash, her existence a reminder of his failure. The house on Saint Leonard wasn't a home. It was a tomb, its walls soaked in silent suffering. As I pored over their stories, the horror grew, not just of their deaths, but of the lives they'd endured. I knew then, whoever pushed that car into the canal had been killing them for years. The deeper I dug into the Shafia case, the colder the air around me grew. By mid-July 2009, what started as a hunch solidified into a grotesque certainty. This wasn't a random tragedy, but a meticulously crafted slaughter. Mohammad Shafia, Tooba Yahya, and Hamed had spun a web of death so deliberate it felt like staring into a void where humanity once lived. As an investigator, I'd seen evil before, but this was a family turned into a killing machine, driven by a warped sense of honor that chilled me to the bone. It began with the laptop, a digital diary of intent. Hamed's searches were like footsteps in the dark. Where to commit a murder? How deep are canals? Can a prisoner manage his wealth? Each query was a nail in the coffin they were building. Then, on June 29, 2009, they bought the Nissan Sentra for $5,000, a beat-up relic, cheap enough to discard. I could picture Mohammad in his Dubai-bought suit, haggling over the price, his mind already on the locks. Tooba, ever the shadow, stood by, her silence a green light. Hamed, the dutiful son, likely drove it home, eager to please the father who'd molded him into a monster. This wasn't impulse. It was premeditation etched in every move. The night of June 30th unfolded like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. They'd checked into a Kingston motel on their way back from Niagara Falls, a supposed family vacation. The manager's words stuck with me. They said 6 people, 2 rooms. 4 were unaccounted for: Zainab, Sahar, Geeti, and Rona. I stood at the locks weeks later, reconstructing it. The moonless sky draped everything in black. The canal's water a mirror of oblivion. Wiretaps captured Mohammed's voice, calm and sinister. The locks are quiet at night. No one's there. They'd been here before, maybe in 2008, maybe earlier, testing the site, measuring the drop, plotting the perfect grave. The Crown's theory was brutal. The victims didn't drown by chance. Those head bruises, fresh, precise, hinted at violence before the plunge. I imagined Mohammed's hands, calloused from years of control, striking Zainab's skull as she begged. Sahar, quiet and fragile, crumpling under a blow. Geeti, the fighter, silenced mid-scream. Rona, frail and resigned, taking her last breath under his glare. Tooba likely held the keys, her face a mask as she handed them to Hamed. The Nissan rolled toward the edge, engine off, headlights dark. It snagged on the stone lip, an error they hadn't foreseen. So Hamed climbed into the Lexus, floored it, and rammed the smaller car into the water, glass shattering like bones. I walked the scene at midnight once, the air heavy with ghosts. The splash would have been soft, swallowed by the night. 4 lives sank, their final moments a secret locked in that steel tomb. Mohammed's wire-tapped words echoed, "Even if they hang me, honor is all that matters." To him, this was a cleansing. To me, it was a massacre, planned with a predator's patience. The girl's dreams, Zainab's love, Sahar's hope, Geeti's rebellion, snuffed out. Rona's decades of loyalty, erased. The canal didn't just take their bodies, it hid the cruelty of a family that saw them as trash to be dumped. I swore I'd rip that truth from the shadows, no matter how deep it was buried. By July 23, 2009, the noose tightened around Mohammed, Tooba, and Hamed. We'd started with a sudden death label, 4 bodies in a submerged car, a fluke gone wrong. But the evidence screamed murder, and I wouldn't let it stay silent. The Lexus headlight shards at the locks were the first crack in their facade. I persuaded them to let us inspect the SUV, and the damage aligned perfectly. Dents, scrapes, a collision no highway mishap could mimic. We theorized the Lexus shoved the Nissan in, and every clue we uncovered turned that theory to stone. The wiretaps were our goldmine. Mohammed's voice hissed through the static. They were treacherous whores. May the devil shit on their graves. No tears, just venom for daughters who dared to breathe free. Tooba deflected, her words slippery as eel. The police lie about everything. Hamed boasted about the lock's isolation, a kid playing gangster in his father's game. Their stories crumbled. First, they'd slept through it all at the motel. Then Tooba spun a tale of fainting at the scene, only to backtrack when pressed. Hamed's Montreal accident with the Lexus that morning, reported hours after the murders, was a laughable ruse. Cell records pinned him in Kingston at 2 a.m., not Montreal by 6:48 a.m., as he swore. Time didn't bend for their lies. The trial kicked off October 20th, 2011, at Frontenac County Courthouse. A chaotic clash in English, French, Dari, and Spanish. I sat in the gallery, watching Mohammed's stone-cold stare, Tooba's rehearsed sobs, Hamed's slouch like a scolded pup. The jury got the full weight. Hamed's searches, the victim's bruises, the motel's head count of 6. Collision experts mapped the Lexus's push, its headlight bits a breadcrumb trail. The pathologist couldn't say where they drowned, canal or elsewhere, but those head wounds shouted premeditation. After nearly 3 months, on January 29, 2012, the jury deliberated 15 hours and delivered guilty, 4 counts of first-degree murder each. Life, no parole for 25 years. "We didn't commit the murder," Mohammed barked through a translator. "I'm not a murderer. I'm a mother," Tooba cried. "I didn't drown my sisters," Hamed mumbled. The jury wasn't fooled. One juror wept as they locked it in. Justice Robert Moranger branded it despicable, heinous, a crime birthed from a twisted concept of honor with no place in civilized society. Outside, Crown Attorney Gerard Larhouse hailed it as a win for Canadian values. But as I left, a bitter taste lingered. Justice came, but too late. I'd read the girls' pleas, Zainab's boyfriend woes, Sahar's abuse reports, Geeti's cries to flee. Rona's diary begged for escape. Why didn't we act? The system let them sink, and that failure haunted me as much as the killer's icy resolve. The Shafia case is closed now, the courtroom silent, the headlines faded. Mohammed, Tooba, and Hamed sit behind bars, their lives swapped for the ones they extinguished. Zainab, Sahar, Geeti, and Rona, gone forever. But months later, I found myself back at the Rideau Canal, standing on the lock's edge as dusk bled into night. The water flowed dark and endless, a mirror to the abyss I'd peered into. It wasn't just a crime scene anymore. It was a grave whispering truths we can't bury. Those 4 didn't die in a single night. They were killed by years of cruelty, and their deaths demand we listen. Mohammed's evil was a slow poison. He saw his daughters as chattel, their spirits shackles he'd break to keep his honor intact. Zainab's love, Sahar's dreams, Geeti's defiance. They were threats to his throne, stains he'd erase with blood. Tooba, their mother, didn't cradle them. She handed them to the slaughter, her loyalty a chain forged in cowardice. Hamed, barely 20, traded his soul for his father's nod, his hands as guilty as the water that drowned them. Their honor was a hollow god, demanding sacrifice, and they offered up their own flesh without a flinch. The horror wasn't just the act. It was the decades of dread, the beatings hidden in shadows, the hope strangled before it could bloom. The victim's pain lingers like a scar. Zainab, 19, fought for a love her father cursed, her heart a battlefield. Sahar, 17, hid her tears behind smiles, her bruises a secret she couldn't keep. Geeti, 13, screamed for freedom, her rebellion a light snuffed too soon. Rona, 50, endured decades as a shadow, her diary a cry no one answered. They weren't just drowned, they were erased, their lives a currency for a family's pride. I see their faces in the water's ripples, hear their voices in the wind. Why didn't you save us? They'd reached out. Teachers, friends, social workers knew their fear, but the net failed, letting them slip through to that cold, wet end. This isn't just their story. It's a warning. Honor killings, domestic terror, call it what you like. It's murder, raw and ruthless. Canada boasts justice, but where was it when Geeti begged to run? When Rona wrote of her terror? We let silence be their sentence, and the canal their tomb. I challenge you. Look at the quiet houses, the shut doors. Hear the muffled cries, the pleas brushed aside. We can't undrown those four, but we can stop the next car from sinking. Their eyes haunt me still, gazing up from the depths, asking for more than justice. They ask for change. Let's make sure no one else joins them in that black, endless grave.